Well, welcome back to our Journalists Roundtable. Let's get right back to it. Market volatility. Lorna, it's been dominating the news. We see those tickers going off at the bottom of our screens all the time. What are the main factors behind these highs and lows that we've been witnessing?
You're right, it has been quite a roller coaster ride here in New York and indeed across the world markets ever since the beginning of the year, really. As 2016 started, I think investors were at something of a crossroads about whether to take an optimistic route or a pessimistic route. And I think really it's all down to oil prices. And we have seen, particularly here in New York, that stocks have religiously tracked the price of oil. And as oil has gone down and down and down, so have the major indices here in New York. And really, that oil price is linked to fears about an economic slowdown in China, which of course is the world's largest importer of oil and second largest consumer of oil after the US. And every time economic data comes in from China, the oil market seems to wobble as a result of it. Added to that, though, of course, we've also seen a great deal of indecision at OPEC, and that decision not to put a cap on the amount of oil being pumped by OPEC members at the end of last year also sent things into a tailspin. Big concerns about a glut of oil on the market. So really, it does seem to be mainly the oil market that is sending stocks all over the place here in New York and indeed globally. But add to that, of course, the Federal Reserve here in the US, which did put up interest rates at the end of last year and signaled that it was intending to do so again gradually over the course of this year. Then, of course, this week we saw that they're holding them steady, at least for now, over concerns about volatility.
Afshin, what is your view on the role that oil has been playing in this roller coaster that Lorna has been talking about? Could the oil price lead the way back? Because we are now seeing some kind of tentative talks taking place between Russia and Saudi Arabia, two of the biggest producers in the world, to cut production, push prices back up.
Sure. You know, it's interesting. I mean, there's really three things weighing on markets right now. It's the oil price, it's the China slowdown, and emerging market slowdown in general. When it comes to the oil, to your specific question, normally when we think of, you know, a fall in the price of oil, we think that's a good thing, right? We think, you know, that we have more money in our pockets from, you know, spending less on gas, you know, the industrial inputs is cheaper, et cetera. But I think there's so many banks that are exposed to shale oil companies and other banks that are exposed to other energy companies around the world. And also what has happened is the fall in the oil price. The danger is this a matter of oversupply, or is this a demand issue? And if it's a demand issue, then it means that global demand is down worldwide, particularly in China, which in many ways has become, China has been like the speedboat, and there have been water skiers behind that speedboat, Australia, Brazil, Venezuela, and as China has slowed down, those water skiers are wobbling a great deal. And so oil can certainly, if I think what we need to find is a price range where, you know, the banks are not as exposed, shale can continue to produce, and some of these oil-dependent exporting economies that were also buying a lot of goods and recycling some of their petrodollars are not as wobbly as they are right now.
So we have China, which is experiencing a slowdown right now, as we've just heard. But to what extent is one other factor in China influencing world markets? It is transitioning its economy now from one that was based on manufacturing, infrastructure development, to one that is going to be based on consumers right now. To what extent is that playing a role?
I think yes and no. Yes, it means that you actually see sort of a volatile equity market, stock market, exchange rate, because Chinese has been conducting sort of a financial liberalization, and I think it's a learning process for them. The stock market has been not been mature, I mean, for a long time. So it's a quite different scene. So this gives people the impression that China is kind of have a turbulent. But on the other side, I mean, I think the Chinese call the new normal. I think it's a really good thing because there's a transition to an economy that's more environmental friendly, more equitable growth, and more better social security network, and so I think moving up the supply chain, I think if that can be achieved, I mean, everybody knows that if that is going to be achieved, that means slower growth, and but much better quality growth. So you have actually yesterday, if you read the Wall Street Journal, you have Apple, GE, Starbucks CEO coming out saying they are very optimistic about the Chinese market, and the real economy is actually quite good. I mean, 6.9%. It's one of the highest in the world. I mean, still. I mean, if you think the U.S. Grow 2.4% in 2015 and only 0.7 in the fourth quarter, so that's amazing. But that means relatively slowdown. So I just hope they're going to achieve that goal for the new normal, and then I think we can deal with a sort of slowdown for a few years.
Okay, who's going to be the next president in the United States? Afshin, we've just had another Republican debate, otherwise known as the new reality show here on television. This one without the frontrunner, Donald Trump. Right. How did it go?
Well, the front-runner, Donald Trump, still seemed to make headlines, even without being a part of the debate. But it was interesting to watch this debate without Donald Trump there, and to see, Ted Cruz, took some hits from some of the candidates. And I think we should watch the Marco Rubio candidacy. He's surging in Iowa. But if you look at all the polls, it is pretty extraordinary that Donald Trump could actually take the trifecta, the first three primaries of Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. And I think if anybody told you that 6 months ago, you would have thought they were insane. So it really is interesting to see, how Donald Trump has tapped into a certain amount of angst and anxiety and uncertainty and real anger in some of those voters, and he's riding this wave.
Right, Nathan, I guess if Donald Trump does take the first three primaries, the caucus in Iowa, he gets something called momentum, right?
Yeah, and it's quite incredible that he's at this stage, and everyone thought he would dissolve, in August or September or October, and we're 3 days out, and he's leading in the polls. But remember, Donald Trump's phrase is "Make America Great Again." That means he's appealing to his supporters who think America isn't great. Now, who are they? A lot of surveys have been done that show they're white people who have slipped or slipping away from the middle class, that don't have college degrees, that have made up the bulk of economic success since the end of the Second World War here in the US, but are now losing out. And there's a deep-seated anger in parts of the country that Donald Trump has tapped into. A rejection of Congress, which is approval ratings are 11 or 12%. People are angry, they want change, they think the system is rigged, and Donald Trump, a billionaire, is appealing to these people. It's quite incredible. We haven't seen anything like this in politics for a long time. Even Barack Obama surprised less people than Donald Trump is right now. But we haven't voted yet, so it could all change.
Yeah, Lorna, in both the Republican and Democratic parties, we're seeing support for, I guess, what could be called non-establishment candidates. On the Republican side, we've got Donald Trump, of course. And on the Democrat side, we've got Bernie Sanders. I mean, does it surprise you that people are going for these candidates who might not come from the mainstream?
Well, it doesn't surprise me when you look at what's going on in Europe, because, of course, there as well we have seen non-establishment politicians rise to the fore. Not only somebody like Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, we've seen Marine Le Pen in France, Podemos in Spain as well, Pegida in Germany, all of these parties which you might not have given a second thought to a few years ago, which are really driving the political discourse in Europe. So it's perhaps unsurprising that in the American election a similar force might come to the fore as well. But what is interesting is that the people, a little bit as Nathan was saying, who are voting for these candidates don't tend to fall along party lines. And particularly when you look at the Republicans, they tend to fall usually into two blocks. So you have the establishment candidates, people like Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush, and then you have your sort of further right Christian conservatives, people like Mike Huckabee or Rick Santorum. But Donald Trump is creating a new block in the middle of that. So if you look at the statistics regarding Trump supporters, they tend to be lower income, as you were saying, less educated, concerned about competition from abroad, skeptical about free trade. So they are not establishment candidates, but neither are they particularly religious. A lot of them don't necessarily identify themselves as particularly religious. Neither are they particularly worried about things like abortion, issues that normally Christian conservatives are very concerned about. So they are a new bloc altogether in American politics. The question is whether that bloc is enough of a force when it comes to the caucuses in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and so on, whether that bloc is enough to give Donald Trump that momentum and whether he can take it forward and become the nominee.
I just want to add here, it's also a question if they turn up to the polls, because Iowa caucus is very complicated, especially on the Democratic side for Bernie Sanders, and we haven't seen huge amounts of new registrations in Iowa. So Trump could have a lot of support, but will they actually turn out on caucus night? That is going to be key. And by the way, I'm going to be heading up to Iowa, so it's going to be fun.
So we'll watch it through, Nathan. Weihua, there's a question I've asked you before on how the Chinese view the American election campaign. But at this stage, I mean, you've told us in the past that they're not really interested. Is that still the case? Are they still not interested?
Well, I think it's becoming more interesting, I would say. Actually, the rally Trump had this morning, actually, they reported there was a Chinese group observing, and when they asked her, and the woman said, oh, he is very rich. So I think when Michael Bloomberg jumped in, I mean, he will be known as a rich man, I mean, running for president. You know, I think the Chinese are paying more attention, but I think it will be after primary. You know, my personal, feeling is, I mean, for Bernie Sanders, I mean, even a lot of people think he's idealist, but I think, when you have John F. Kennedy said we want to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, I think America, the richest country, should be able to solve many of the problems Bernie Sanders laid out. I mean, the trouble for me, I know Hillary is a safe bet maybe, but it's kind of boring to see maybe even 3 Bushes or 2 Clintons in just a short period of time in American history.
Right, let's get to the next big story. Let's go around the table. Afshin, starting with you.
Well, I think it remains the China economy, because when you look at it's the single largest driver of the global economy's downward pressure that we're seeing today, right now. When you look at the big oil exporting economies around the world and the commodities exporters, they're the wobbly water skiers that I referred to earlier. Yeah. When you look at currency, around the world, and when you look at stock market volatility, let me just give you one example. China published some manufacturing data a few weeks ago. That manufacturing data was weaker than expected. Chinese equities fell, Brazilian equities fell, European equities fell, the S&P fell. In some respects, it's a testament to the success of China's economic growth, the fact that it has become this great big behemoth that it affects so much of the global economy. And now the question everybody is asking in the institutional investor circles that I work in is, how is China's leadership going to handle this? Are we going to have a hard landing or a soft landing? I think that's the big story.
Lorna?
Well, I think there are a couple of things worth mentioning. First of all, we haven't mentioned it so far, but the Zika virus has been another big story this week. And Barack Obama has announced a big push for the US to try and come up with a vaccine or a cure for it. And that's worth noting simply because I think around 60% of the US population on both coasts and in the Midwest are potentially at risk from that virus. So when and if some kind of treatment is found for that, it will be a very big story and something that US science will now be concentrating on a great deal. So that's one thing. But secondly, worth noting as well this week, Barack Obama announced a ban on solitary confinement for juveniles in detention. And I think that really shows that's a trend worth watching for Barack Obama as he gets towards the end of this second term. He's really pushing much harder on issues of criminal justice and of race. I think something that he was very keen to avoid in his first term. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on issues like that he tries to push forward more towards the end of his presidency, because of course he, I guess, feels now he has less to lose on that score.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. 2 big stories from Lorna. Nathan, what's the next big story?
I'll keep myself to one, but they are connected with something else. Syrian peace talks, or the lack of them. This civil war has raged on for 5 years. It has divided the international community. Since Russia got involved, and you can debate why and all that sort of thing, there has been a renewed realization that everyone has to come together and try and work this out. Not just the Security Council, which of course has been divided, as we know, at the United Nations, Russia, China, US and its allies, but also the regional powers, Iran, Saudi Arabia, increasingly Turkey as well. And also this fits into the fight against ISIS. You cannot have a bleeding sore at the heart of the Middle East without global repercussions, and I think everyone is realizing that now. The big question is, has enough blood been spilt on the battlefield for people to understand that you need peace?
Well, what's the next big story?
Well, I mean, if you ask a few days ago, I would have said the RMB exchange rate, because of being so volatile, I mean, it's depreciated, because that matters to the sort of the wealth of the 1.3 billion Chinese. I mean, myself included, obviously. But now I would say I would agree with Lorna. I mean, the Zika virus, I think, because of the uncertainty, there is no vaccine, to be seen produced in a short period of time. So, and I think so there will be a panic. I mean, already there was China. I mean, because people traveling between China and South America, Latin America, so much now, and so there is a warning. So I think the certainty is just going to make it a larger news. I mean.